Hey everybody, welcome back again for session 3 of our Overflow marriage study. And I'm so excited as we're just digging in more and more. And this is going to be just a great session for you. And what we're going to be talking about today is how to overflow in our expectations in our marriage. I think this is a great conversation question to have with your spouse right here. Think about this question: which do you prefer? Do you prefer a store-bought card or a handwritten note? Think about that. All right, you might want to stop and just answer that. You probably whisper into one another. Do you prefer a gift or a fun adventure? Do you prefer a quiet night at home or maybe an outing with some friends? Think about that. What are some of those things that you prefer? And maybe you're learning something about your spouse right now that you never knew before. And you think about this: what is something that you've learned about marriage that you didn't expect? That's a big thing we're going to talk about today, is understanding just expectations and where they come from. In fact, let me just kind of share with you 3 areas that expectations come from within our lives. First, our expectations come from prior experiences with our family. Whenever I do premarital counseling, one of the things I always ask the wife, as I say, hey, what kind of relationship did you have with your dad? And sometimes you can pick up on that and you can understand what expectations that she has for her dad or for the husband down the road. And then I'll ask the husband to be as well the same question: what's the expectation or what kind of relationship did you have with your mother? And then if the mother was the one that cooked for him every night, whatever that is, whether he realizes it or not, he's bringing that expectation to his soon-to-be wife. And so once again, prior experiences with our family can be an expectation. Here's the second thing: cultural influences. We get exposed to what happens in Hollywood, and we think that is what kind of expectation we need to have for our spouse. And so we allow the culture to shape the expectations that we have for one another. And here's the last thing: sometimes it's just prior experiences, just from bad relationships or any kind of relationship. Maybe you've had a bad relationship before. Maybe you've been married once before. You're going back through this. You're going through marriage again. Whatever that is, those are experiences that we have, and sometimes we bring those prior experiences into our marriage, trying to seek and understand where expectations come from. Now, here's the thing I want us to talk about: is how do we develop and communicate healthy expectations within our marriage? I think that's really important. A real good question is to even think about: is it okay for me to have expectations for my spouse? Yeah, it's okay to have expectations for my spouse. We need to have some of those things. Now, here's the thing: I don't want to be legalistic about them. I don't want to say that it's going to impact our marriage or anything like that. Because why? So often, if we leave those expectations uncommunicated, they become assumptions. And we've got to be careful about that. We never want to have assumptions within our marriage. And so what I want to do is I want to go to Scripture just real briefly. I just want to see what are some ways that we can have some healthy expectations. And I want to address it from first the wife's side, and then I want to go to the guy's side. I want to show as well there's some times when we miss expectations. So let's jump in here to Song of Solomon, chapter 2, because the Song of Solomon is really a great passage that helps us just to understand about expectations. Listen to verse 3, and this is coming from the woman that's speaking in this passage. Like an apricot tree among the trees of the forest, so is my love among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banquet hall. He looked on me with love, sustained me with raisins, refreshed me with apricots. For I am lovesick. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. Young women of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and the wild does of the field, do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. Listen, my love is approaching. Look, here he comes, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My love is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, he's standing behind our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. My love calls to me. The guy speaks for a moment and says, arise, my darling. Come away, my beautiful one, for now the winter has passed. The rain has ended and gone away. The blossom appears in the countryside. The time of singing has come. And the turtle dove's cooing is heard in our land. The fig tree ripens its figs, and blossoming vines give off their fragrance. Arise, my darling. Come away, my beautiful one. Now, when you stop and you think about that, we're getting some very intense language that's happening here. But let me just share with you as well what the expectations that she was having in this moment. First, she was having an expectation of protection. You go back to verse 3, how she wanted to sit under the tree. That's the expectation of protection. Verse 4 talks about an expectation of proclamation. She wants it to be proclaimed about the love that they have for one another. Verse 5 is the expectation of provision, how we're providing for our spouses and taking care of them. Verse 6 is protection again, and it's protection from outer influences. And then you go to verse 7, it's a protection or an expectation of purity, how we're going to have purity within our marriage. And then you go on 8 and 9, talk about the power that you're to have, and then 10 through 13, the pursuit. Every wife wants to be pursued in her marriage. And so that's so important for you to just remember is what kind of expectations that she has. Now here's the thing for guys. What kind of expectations do we have? Listen to verse 14. It says, my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the crevices of the cliff, let me see your face, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, for our vineyards are in bloom. Now I know that kind of sounds a little weird of what's being said here, but you got to remember, here's what he's saying. Verse 14, visual. Here's his expectation. I want to see your face. He says, verse 14 again, vocal. I want to hear your voice. You see, being there, being present. That's so much of what guys want in the relationship. Verse 15 is talking about vetting, right? Let's protect our marriage. That's what that protection from the foxes was all about. Now, the passage goes on there in chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, and it starts to kind of take a little bit of a turn because what we start to see are some missed expectations. Listen to what it says. In my bed at night, I sought the one I love. I sought him, but did not find him. I will arise now and go about the city. Through the streets and the plazas, I will seek the one I love. I sought him, but did not find him. There's missed expectations that are happening there. And it was the expectation of where to be found. There was the expectation of what they were going to be doing. There was the expectation of who they would be with. And so those sometimes can rear their heads in our marriage if we're not careful of just missed expectations. In fact, I want to share with you something that I believe is going to, I think, just revolutionize the way that you just start to recognize and just communicate expectations. In fact, every single one of us have expectations for our marriage. Now, here's the thing. We have also expectation gaps. You see, here's what happens. You have expectations for your spouse. But when your spouse doesn't perform the way that you are expecting them to, then there's this gap that exists. And that's where I believe the majority of our arguments come from, is what I call the expectations gap. Now, other people have used the same kind of language before, so you could go out, you could find more information on this. But the reality is that there is a gap that exists. And so that's where a lot of our arguments come from. So how do we bridge this gap? Well, first and foremost, communication. I've got to know, we've got to talk about, we've got to know our expectations that we have for one another. We got to understand if they're realistic or not. But here's the other thing as well. We bridge the gap with grace. We bridge the gap with grace. Forgive one another just as Christ has forgiven you. Ephesians 4:31-32. And so I think that's just a great reminder for us of how we're going to bring this all together is understanding it's okay. Yes, we're going to have expectations. Sometimes our spouses are not going to meet those expectations, but we can bridge that together with communication and with grace. Guys, once again, this is just a small, simple step for us just to begin working through the expectations that we have, helping to grow in that more and more. God bless you guys, and I'll see you guys at the next session.